Hello everyone, Dr. Mad here. Let's get mad about English language. So in this video, we are going to look at an example paper. I've just picked one at random. We're not going to actually do the paper. It's just talking about the paper in general terms, how you should go through it, how you should answer the questions. Okay, so here we have a paper, and you can find this yourself on the AQA website. So this one happens to be the June 2018 paper. So as you can see there, paper one, Explorations in Creative Reading and Writing. That's the official title of the paper. And it's normally held in May or June, and it's 1.25 hours, 1 hour 45 minutes. So 1 hour and 3/4. And you have one source A provided as a separate insert. And that's the insert here, which we're going to look at in a minute. And you have to answer all the questions. I won't go through all this in line by line. I'll just pick out some of the main bits. You cannot use a dictionary. So if there's any word you don't know, you need to try and work it out using the context. But I'll talk more about that later on. And it's 80 marks. You've got section A and section B, 40 marks each. Section A is the reading section, and section B is the writing section. And here's some general advice. I would say maybe spend 10 minutes reading through all the questions and the extract. And it says you should spend some time planning for question 5. We'll come to that. Okay, so before we look at the questions, let's have a look at the actual insert. So what I would advise is that you actually read the insert first. And it doesn't give you much information. So use the information that they do give you. So this is 21st Century Prose Fiction, Jigs and Reels by Joanne Harris, an extract from a collection of short stories published in 2004. So the fact that these are short stories, I think, is important. It will give you a clue how to approach the extract, how you approach a short story extract. Maybe slightly different to how it might be for a novel, and it's fairly modern fiction. So that also gives you a little bit of context to think about. Remember, you don't actually have to write about context in the language exam, okay? That's only for the literature exam. And then you've got the source. Now, here again, you'll see they don't give you a lot of background information. So the bit that they do give you, you really should take advantage of. So it says here, source A is taken from the beginning, right, of a short story written by Joanne Harris. Mr. Fisher, a teacher of English for 40 years, works at St. Oswald's Grammar School for Boys. So there's a little bit of contextual information that will be useful for you because remember, you don't have much time in the language exam. Okay, timing is absolutely critical. You have to use military timing. Okay, so I'm not going to actually read through the extract because we're not doing the paper as such. We're just looking at it, how to approach the paper in general terms. So notice you've got the line numbers, and these are important, as you'll see. And normally the extract goes over onto the second page. Usually it's only a little bit onto the second page, so it makes you wonder why they can't keep it all on one page. I do suspect that that's deliberate. They do want you to turn the page and to find information on two sides, which is a little bit more difficult than if it was just on one page. So these small things do make a difference. Okay. Now notice here, there's no glossary, there's no dictionary. Sometimes they will give you a small glossary, just one or two words which are particularly difficult. But in this case, notice they haven't given you anything. So if there are words that you don't understand, you need to try and work them out. But also, actually, you shouldn't worry too much if you don't understand every single word, because even for the biggest question, the highest mark question, question 4, 20 marks, you only need to make about 3 or 4 points. Okay? So, and you'll find there's more than enough material that you can pick from without necessarily understanding every single word. Okay, so let's now go back to the question paper. So section A, reading. Answer all questions in this section. You're advised to spend about 45 minutes on this section. So first thing you're going to do is spend 10 minutes reading through everything, the extract and the questions, as I explained in the introductory video, which I hope you've seen. If you haven't, then you need to go and watch that first, the one about the exam format, the assessment objectives, and the marking criteria. So question 1, it says, read again the first part of the source from lines 1 to 4. So this is really important, and they've highlighted it for you, so there's no excuse, okay? And it says, list 4 things about Mr. Fisher from this part of the source, and that's 4 marks. So the format of the questions is always the same, okay? But obviously, the focus of the question will change. So obviously, so this bit here will always be the same, but the line numbers may change. It's usually the first few lines, but you just need to read this very carefully and make sure that you are referring to the correct lines. And then it'll always be 4 things about something or other. But obviously, what exactly it's about will depend on the extract and the exam. Okay? So in this case, it's about 4 things about Mr. Fisher. So if you look at the extract, so you need to look at these lines here and find 4 things about Mr. Fisher. So this first question is meant to be fairly straightforward. You sometimes find that 3 things are easy and the 4th thing is a little bit more tricky, but certainly 3 out of 4 facts should be fairly straightforward. So here, we're not looking for hidden meanings. We're not looking for detailed analysis. You can literally just write down 4 quick bullet points, and it could be directly from the source, or you could just paraphrase. Okay, so that's question 1. Very straightforward. Let's move on to question 2. And it says, look in detail at this extract from lines 9 to 15 of the source. Now, again, notice you have to use the line numbers. But actually, in this case, you don't need to worry too much about it because they give you the extract again, or the mini extract within an extract. Okay. And this is what we call the language question. So it says, how does the writer use language here to convey Mr. Fisher's views on books and stories of the past? You could include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, sentence forms, and it's 8 marks. Now, if you've forgotten what we mean by the language question, what we mean by language, well, it's right there. They tell you what it means. It means picking out words and phrases, identifying features and techniques, and then the only thing it doesn't say is you have to talk about the effects and connotations. So effects means thoughts, feelings, images that come to your mind when you think about these words and phrases. So remember, this is only 8 marks, so you only need 2 or 3 points, okay? And in terms of the sentence forms, I would be careful with sentence forms because the problem there is that quite often students write that, oh, the writer has used a short sentence or a long sentence. Well, okay, but that's very easy to spot. A primary school student can do that. So unless you can say something about the effect of the short sentence or the long sentence, then you really want to avoid it. So my advice would be really just to stick to words and phrases, language features and techniques, effects and connotations. Okay. If you're really confident, you can maybe add 1 point on sentence forms, but do not focus on that. Do not rely on that because it's very hard to get marks if you write about sentence forms. Okay. Okay, so that's question 2. Let's move on to. So remember, they do give you a lot of space, but that's only so that if you mess it up, you've got extra space there. It doesn't mean that you have to use all this space. For question 2, 8 marks, you just need 2 or 3 points, two or three short, 2 or 3 paragraphs. Okay, then question 3 is the structure question. But remember, in terms of the order of the questions, you may want to skip this question to start with and come back to it. Okay? Because it's only 8 marks, and students, for some strange reason, really struggle with structure. So if you're not sure, just skip it and come back to it. So it says here, you now need to think about the whole of the source. This text is from the beginning of a short story. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? Now, what my advice here is, first of all, in the exam, just cross this bit out, okay? Because many students will say, oh, well, I don't find it interesting, okay? So, what the examiner is really looking for is not whether you find it interesting or not. What they're looking for is, do you understand the meaning of structure? And structure essentially means beginning, middle, and end. I mean, there are other aspects to it if you're aiming for the higher grades, which we'll talk about in a different video. But essentially is they're asking, do you understand the meaning of structure and can you write about it? Okay. And even if you just write a little bit about the beginning, middle, and end, you would get a few marks, and maybe that's enough, and you can focus on the other bigger mark questions. So it says here you could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, any other structural features that interest you. So again, if you've forgotten what structure means, well, it reminds you there. It says there, look, beginning, and then as the source develops. So that's the middle and the end. So even if you just focused on these first two bullet points, you would be able to get quite a few marks. All right. And this last bullet point, you could maybe leave out unless you're aiming for the highest grades. And we'll talk about that in a different video. Okay, so that's question 3. And then, so notice they give you all this space, but please, you don't need all of it. You just need 2 or 3 paragraphs talking about the beginning, the middle, and the end. And how you actually specifically answer these questions, I will be talking about in different videos. This video is about just the general approach to these exams, to these papers. Now, question 4. You must get to question 4. That's the first thing to say. It's worth 20 marks. It's worth all of the first 3 questions put together. So again, the format of the questions is always the same. Focus this part of your answer on the second part of the source from line 25 to the end. So the bit in the bit in bold is all you need to focus on. So line 25 to the end. Okay. So you go down here. There's line 25. And so it's asking you to focus your answer on this. But notice it does say that you can focus this part of your answer on the second part of the source. So your points have to be mostly about these lines, and your starting point have to be about these lines, from these lines, but you are allowed to refer to the rest of the source as part of your point. Okay, so they give you a statement like this. A student said, "This part of the story where Mr. Fisher is marking homework shows Tibbet's story is better than Mr. Fisher expected, and his reaction is extreme." Now, whether any student ever said this or not is highly unlikely. They've just made up a statement, okay? And it says, "To what extent do you agree?" In your response, you could consider your own impressions of what Mr. Fisher expected Tibbet's homework to be like, evaluate how the writer conveys Mr. Fisher's reactions to what he discovers, support your response with references to the text. Now, the first thing to say is that the advice from AQA is that generally speaking, the statement is designed in such a way that you can mostly agree with it. Okay. So if you're not very confident, you can really just start with, "I mostly agree with the statement, but not completely." And then you just go into your points. But if you are aiming for the higher grades and you want to be very exact about it, then yes, of course, you need to think on your feet. You need to read the extract. You need to think carefully about the statement and ask yourself, do you agree with it? Do you not agree with it? Do you mostly agree or do you mostly disagree? So think on your feet and say what you want to say as your first sentence. And then you need to go through and explain your answer. The chances are, and if you are aiming for the higher grades, most likely you won't 100% agree or disagree. Okay. So it's up to you to be subtle about it. And then it gives you some clues. Now, the key points here are that it's to evaluate, okay? Means to weigh up, to judge, to decide whether you agree with the statement or not. Now, in terms of how the writer conveys, so that's basically talking about language and structure. You can mostly focus on language. So essentially, just picking out words and phrases, discussing effects and connotations, and how they support your argument as to whether this statement is true or not. As you work your way through the extract or the bit that they've asked you to talk about, you will automatically be doing structure anyway. But if you're aiming for the higher grades and you can make specific points about structure, in other words, the beginning, the middle, and the end, how they link together, things like flashback and foreshadowing, is there a cyclical structure, those kind of things, then by all means talk about those. Now it's 20 marks, so you need about 3 or 4 points, all right? Maybe five, but five is a bit much, really. 3 or 4 good, solid paragraphs would be more than enough to answer this question. And of course, when it says you could support your response with references to the text, well, that should really be you should. So you definitely have to give evidence from the text, okay, in speech marks. Okay, moving on to question 5. So remember, this video is just an overview of how you go about doing these papers. We're not going into the details of actually reading through the extract or answering the questions. That will be done in different videos. Okay, so section B, writing. You are advised to spend about 45 minutes on this section. Write in full sentences. You are reminded of the need to plan your answer. You should leave enough time to check your work at the end. And then they'll start with this kind of a statement. A magazine has asked for contributions for their creative writing section. I mean, you don't need to worry too much about this really, but basically the important point is that it says here, either write a description of an old person as suggested by this picture, okay, or write a story about a time when things turned out unexpectedly. And it's 24 marks for content and organization, 16 marks for technical accuracy. So in other words, 60% for content and 40% for grammar, as discussed in the video on the assessment objectives and success criteria. And sorry, and there's a reminder here about planning your answer. So yes, you should spend 5 to 10 minutes on planning, but no more than that. Okay, and you can use a mind map or bullet points. It's entirely up to you. But in terms of the general points, now, firstly, if we think about the picture is there as a starting point. Okay, the picture is there to help you, not to hinder you, not to stop you from doing well. So, for example, your description doesn't actually have to be about this particular face. It could be some other face that you might prefer to write about. And similarly, the title here is just meant as a starting point. The point about the picture and the title is that you're not supposed to just turn up and write down something that you have memorized. Okay. And I mean, actually, in this case, the picture and the title are quite different. The point being that, and it doesn't even matter whether you write a description or a story, or you kind of combine the two. The examiner doesn't really know which question you've answered. You're really just being marked on your actual writing, the content, the imagination, your grammar. So, for example, in this case, if you were to do a description, as long as it was a description about some kind of a face, that would be fine. If you came up and started describing some kind of a mountain scene that you had practiced in class, then you wouldn't get any marks. But as long as there's some reference to some kind of a face, and similarly, if you write about this, so as long as the story is something about where things turned out unexpectedly, and you don't just turn up and write some adventure story or some kind of story that you just practiced and then memorized. All right. So as long as there's some kind of a link to the picture or the title, that's fine. And remember, this question is 40 marks, so it's worth all four of the earlier questions put together. So you have to do well in the creative writing question. The good news is that students are usually quite good at creative writing, actually, whereas the section A, the analytical writing, can be quite tricky. So it's absolutely essential that you spend a good hour 45 minutes on this question 5. Now, notice they give you a lot of space. You don't need to fill all that up, okay? You just need to write about 2 to 3 pages of quality, all right? Let's just go back to the question. So it is about quality, not quantity, but of course, you can't just write one sentence or one paragraph of pure quality and expect to get a grade 9. So you do need to extend it. So as a bare minimum, about 2 pages, right? That's the bad news. Anything less than 2 pages, you're going to struggle unless it's absolutely amazing and it's kind of small writing. But the good news is you do not need to write more than 3 pages. Okay, so 2 to 3 pages of pure quality is what we're aiming for. And one final thing to say is that the creative writing bit, the section B, question 5, is usually related to the extract in some way. So in this case, the extract is about a person called Mr. Fisher. Now, it doesn't mean that this is Mr. Fisher, but the extract is kind of focused on this one particular person. And so you notice they've given you a picture of this one particular person. And also in the extract, something unexpected happens. The teacher is not expecting the student's work to be as good as it is. So it's unexpected. So notice here, the title is about something turning out unexpectedly. So this is important when we think about the order of the questions. So some people say, "Oh, do question 5 first." The problem with that is that it does take time to think of a story, and also the extract, because it's related. The extract might give you some ideas. Okay, I mean, obviously you can't copy from the extract or anything, but you can use the extract for inspiration, or like just to as an example there of what good creative writing looks like. Yeah. So, which is why I recommend the order of questions as being one, two, four. Okay, skip the structure question. Once you've done question four, 20 marks, come back, just spend quick 10 minutes on question three, and then go to question five, the creative writing question, and spend a good 45 minutes on that. Okay, so 10 minutes of reading through everything, and then answer the questions, question one, two, three, and four, but in the order one, two, four, and three, and then spend a good 45 minutes on question five. And if you do that, you can do well in paper one. Okay, so that's it. That's a quick overview of paper one, English language. And in the next video, we'll look at paper two. I hope you found that video useful. And if you did, please do subscribe and tell all your friends about it. And I will see you in the next video.